Hi, my name is Sarah Dauer, class of 2020, and I'm a student guide at the Mount Holyoke College Art Museum. Today we're going to be using the museum's new 3D walkthrough tool to take a look at three objects from my tour, Ghost Tour, Afterlives, and Art. The idea at the core of this ghost tour is imagining objects as living things. So today we're going to be looking specifically at three works that have a central theme in the lives of women and have ties to Mount Holyoke College. It's really interesting to now think about how these objects being preserved virtually, bringing about a particular immortality that didn't exist so many years ago. So first we're going to head to the Weisman Gallery to take a look in major themes celebrating 10 years of teaching with art. Some objects, like this one, have been borrowed from Mount Holyoke's Skinner Museum. What are your first impressions when you look at the birds in this glass case? Here are some questions we can consider. Are you intrigued? Are you disturbed? What catches your eye? The shades of red, yellow, blue, unblinking eyes, the stillness. What do you imagine the function of this object to be? This piece is labeled as Birds of Mary Lyon's Time, and this was a gift from taxidermist Lucius Hyde in 1845 to one of the early graduates of Mount Holyoke College, Nancy Shaw Everett. Birds in glass cases were a popular gift for young women in the 19th century, and Lucius Hyde was actually a South Hadley local. The object became a souvenir of the Connecticut Valley when Nancy Shaw Everett moved to New York City to seek fortune with her husband, John Dwight. If you've ever been walking around the college, you may recognize the name Dwight from Dwight Hall. To me, when I look at this work, I feel a contrast between the colors of the birds and the violence of how they must have been killed and then strategically mounted within this glass case. In the 19th century, taxidermy became increasingly popular in the US as decoration in the home, as business advertisement, and in sporting trophies. Reflected in their popularity is the idea that humans could symbolically bring animals back to life and have this small power over death. People who come into the museum may wonder why this object is on display as art. There appears to be a tension with this object being once alive and now having an afterlife here in the museum. Before Skinner or Mount Holyoke College Art Museum, Birds of Mary Lyon's Time was on display in the Dwight's home in New York, as well as the Mary Lyon room of Mary Woolley Hall on campus. It's not far-fetched to want to associate the symbolic imagery of the birds being stripped of flight and contained with women of the 19th century like Nancy who were gifted these objects. We might ask ourselves, how do we preserve the memory of these women in a museum context? We are now going to virtually travel to the American Gallery to look at this next piece, which is also something. We are now going to virtually travel to the American Gallery to look at this next piece, which is also something that is found in the home. This is a 1705 Hadley chest, named for one of a similar design found in Hadley, Massachusetts. These chests were made throughout the Connecticut Valley, but most popular between 1690 and 1740. Notice the initials and the lock on the chest. This chest belonged to a woman named Editha Kellogg Moody, who is the great-great-grandmother of Mount Holyoke founder Mary Lyon. Let's take a look at the details of this piece. The patterns carved into the face of the chest, sunflowers, tulips, hearts, the brown and black staining, the symmetry of the patterns meeting at a keyhole. The top shows significant wear, indicating heavy use of this object. Looking closely, you can see indentations on the lid where Editha and others must have pressed into over time, opening and closing the chest. To me, the keyhole and initials suggest something private and personal. The chest and one like it were commissioned as gifts to young women to hold textiles and personal items before they got married. Women of this time, of course, could not own land, but they could own these chests as one of their few possessions, holding things that would be most important to their housewifery, like silver and linens. I often wonder what Editha kept in her chest. She's actually buried down the street from Mount Holyoke with a grave marker that has the same tulip imagery as her Hadley chest, which brings about the question, could the decorations have been her own aesthetic choice, or were they chosen by the artist? One of my favorite parts about this object is actually not normally visible to museum visitors, and so it's a treat to be able to see pictures like this with more detail. Take a look at those dark spots on the inside of the lid. What do you think caused them? Someone must have repeatedly opened the chest while holding a candle, needing to light what was inside while searching for something at night. Domestic items like this can connect us to people like Editha who existed in the past. They have such power because of physical marks of use. The last piece I'm going to show you is a 2009 work by Faith Ringgold entitled "And Woman" that she created during her residency at the Mount Holyoke printmaking workshop. In 2020, in the museum's front gallery, which we are entering now virtually, the museum's front gallery showcased prints by women artists in the workshop from 1984 to 2012. This print portrays two women. On the right, a portrait of Sojourner Truth is overridden with the text of her speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" the Women's Convention in 1851. And on the left, the image of Abigail Adams backdrops a letter to her husband, John Adams, imploring him to consider the rights of women in the formation of the new nation in 1776. It is a part of a portfolio with 6 other prints by the artist called "Declaration of Freedom and Independence." Faith Ringgold is an artist and activist who has spent her life fighting for the rights of African Americans and women. In the portfolio, her intention was to expose the inherently unequal notion of freedom in America's most famous founding document. Let's look at these two women, intentionally juxtaposed by Ringgold, who puts their image side by side. The history of women's suffrage involved excluding Black women in order to convince white men to give white women voting rights. Abigail Adams was an abolitionist, but this does not mean that by asking for women's rights to be considered that she meant all women. Sojourner Truth disagreed with Frederick Douglass's leadership for reasons such as his patronization of her faith-based way of speaking and his belief that suffrage for Black men should come first before Black women. How does this work make you feel? For me, I feel a connection to history through their portraits, the gray tone suggesting something of the past like 19th century photographs, and makes me think of generations of women and women's experiences in the larger United States. Let's take a closer look at the text. Are there lines that stick out to you? All men would be tyrants if they could. Look at me, look at my arm. I've plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no men could heed me. And ain't I a woman? If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion. Even though these women are long gone, their words are lasting and pertinent, overlaying their images. Although we may not have a clear visualization of what important figures like Sojourner and Abigail looked like when we think of them, we remember their words. Thank you for exploring with me in the Mount Holyoke College Art Museum. I think there's something really special about engaging with everyday objects as having their own past lives, particularly the objects of those marginalized by their gender, whose histories have often been overlooked. I hope you'll feel a greater connection to the ghosts behind these works in particular when you return to the museum in person, especially as Mount Holyoke College is a gender-diverse women's college with its own place in history since 1837. Looking for more ways to engage with Mount Holyoke's collection? Check out the new virtual tour or search the collection database on the Mount Holyoke College Art Museum website. Thanks for visiting!